The next time you go vote in West Bloomfield Township, you may need to go to a different polling place. Changes are underway with West Bloomfield Township's clerk's office shifting gears on some of the township's voting precincts. Here to explain the changes is Clerk Debbie Binder. Debbie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning, Tyler. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well, and good to talk to you about this. Elections are always some time that get a lot of people out in our community to have their voices heard locally, statewide, federally, of course. But there's some changes on the way to our precincts, reducing the number overall, but a pretty clear and concise reason for that. Please explain.
So what we have seen over the last, many years, we've seen a shift in voter habits where they've taken more to voting, ahead of Election Day, whether it's by absentee voting, and now we have early voting. So we've seen a declining number of people voting on Election Day. And Proposal 2 of 2022 statutorily allowed communities to increase the size of registered voters in their precincts from 2,999 to 4,999. We didn't do it right away because we wanted to wait and see the metrics from the November of 2024 election and, see what we saw in a big election before we made that kind of decision, and we didn't want to make the wrong decision. Many communities are doing this, though, now to consolidate because we have seen a tremendous voter shift. We're averaging about 30% of voters now on Election Day, which is down significantly from the numbers that used to vote in the precinct. So it will allow us to, we will consolidate precincts. It will allow, provide for fewer election workers, less equipment, and it will just make it easier to administer Election Day. In this case, it will result in almost everybody will have a new precinct number. Most will not change their polling location. Most will vote in the same polling location, just in a new precinct number. There will be some, though, that will have a change of location, and some just by, for example, the Parks building is being rebuilt, so they will be relocated for at least for a while. So with those kinds of changes, but we are trying to keep things as stable as possible. Hopefully you'll see some of the same faces, but we will see we are going to go from 26 precincts down to 20 precincts. And it is consistent. I think if you look around at communities, everyone is either made that change or is making that change. We just didn't want to make it going into 24 until we were confident that the numbers were still going to be there.
And you mentioned a lot of these details at the recent West Bloomfield Township Board meeting. That is on civiccentertv.com on demand for those watching and listening if you want to hear some more details on this from earlier on in the month. Part of what went into the restructuring of these precincts that I think people will really be well receptive to, Debbie, is aligning the precincts more along the lines of where the schools are located. Often in the past we've had people that are on the borderlines of maybe Walled Lake and West Bloomfield schools. Their kids go to one and they vote in another. That's somewhat rectified in these new precincts, correct?
It will definitely help the way it's been a tremendous outcome of being able to have those size precincts. We will now, we are a community that has 7 school districts in that, and within our boundaries, our jurisdiction, which is unusual. The next closest is White Lake with 5, and most only have 1 or 2. So 7 school districts is quite a few within the boundaries that we're conducting elections for. So previously, we had multiple precincts that had what we would call a split, and they had ballots from the two different school districts, or sometimes it was including when one district had an election, the other one didn't. But the election workers, who are just temporary workers, had to make sure that the voter got the correct ballot, whichever school district they lived in. We were able to consolidate now in such a way that each precinct will only have 1 school district within it. So it will make it much easier for the election workers on Election Day, and it will make it easier for the clerk's office to administer and just increase the efficiency as well of not having to manage different ballot styles. So we look forward to that change. Most of the buildings, we're trying to finalize 1 precinct still. Into a new location, but we're not sure exactly what that location will be yet. We're trying to align it better with the school district, or at least with not having to have a neighboring school district be open on election day for an election that they don't have. So we're working on finalizing that, but the map is currently up on the website that will show what people's new precinct number is and what their new polling locations, except for the one precinct that we're still working out the details. And because of this change, as required by law, and to help with the change, every single voter will get a new voter ID card telling them of their new precinct number and their new polling location. And the information is always available, I like to remind people, at what's called the Michigan Voter Information Center, which can be obtained by either going to MVIC for Michigan Voter Information Center.gov or michigan.gov/vote. Either way will lead you to the Voter Information Center where you can confirm that information. Again, we're looking at between early voting and absentee voting, we're having about 70% of our ballots are cast either by absentee ballot or by going to the early voting center. I do think we will continue to see that. We may see some people who experience long lines in the early voting in November of '24, a little hesitant to come back. I can, with quite a bit of confidence, tell people that we won't see that kind of a crowd again in the early voting center until the next presidential election. The other elections have been nowhere near that crowded, so don't be afraid of early voting. And also, I want to remind people that they can bring their absentee ballot to the early voting center. And if they bring their absentee ballot to the early voting center and they feed the ballot through the tabulator, and they've made any kind of a mistake, it'll bring the ballot back to them, and they can spoil it, get a new one, and vote it again. Now, what I mean by mistake, because people go, what's a mistake voting? Mistake would be that in a primary you crossed over parties, and then that made the partisan section of your ballot not count. Or if you overvoted for a contest, you selected 3 choices when you were only allowed to select 2. If you actually scan the ballot yourself through the tabulator is going to give you your ballot back and say, did you mean to make this decision? Or and if it did, the voter has the choice to cast their ballot as is. But if it's not what the voter meant, they do have an opportunity to spoil it and get a new one. So early voting, really, I was kind of one of the later adopters as well, but it's a nice and refreshing opportunity for somebody who, their work schedule makes it harder to get there on election day, or their vacation plans make it hard to get there on election day. It provides a great option for people to vote, a different way. And they can also get on the permanent ballot list, which means they will get an absentee ballot automatically in the mail. When they get that absentee ballot, they can either return it as an absentee ballot, or they can vote it in the early voting center. Again, being able to get feedback if they make a mistake. If it comes through as an absentee ballot and there is a mistake, a bipartisan team is going to look over that ballot and make a determination if the voter just had a stray pen mark and didn't mean to mark a box, or if there was something that triggered the machine to catch it. But it's not the same as the voter having the opportunity to spoil the ballot and vote it again. So I think that the reception to early voting has been significant. And if we look at the shift, we kind of see that our early voting and our absentee kind of brought the previous absentee together, but we've also brought some over from the voting on election day in their polling location. So you will see the fewer number of precincts. So we're going from 26 to 20. And obviously, because I know I've been asked, so I'm bringing this up just because I've been asked, even though I don't anticipate this to be an outcome, what will you do if there are long lines? And obviously, if there are long lines, we will adjust. We will not leave the long lines. Now, what I would recommend to people is there may likely be longer lines in the morning. And everyone tends to go on their way to work. So if you have the ability to go later in the day, the polls are open from 7 a.m. till 8 p.m. So if you have the ability to go later in the day, you won't encounter long lines typically. And if the lines are a little bit longer in the morning, we probably won't make a change. But if we see a really, disruptive pattern of long lines, then obviously it may be inconvenient that election, but we will, we will look at adjusting things in the future to accommodate as voter habits continue to change.
And per legislation that was voted from a referendum by the voters in 2022, it allowed through state law for local clerk's offices to make these sorts of decisions in the future should regulations regarding elections from the federal level, from the state level change. You still would have that flexibility, Debbie, and this will be my last question for you. If we do, for many other reasons, whether they're political reasons, regulatory reasons, or so on, see an increase of people going back to the polls as opposed to early voting or mail-in votes, is there a potential we could see more of these precincts come back years in the future?
I would say that yes, we would adjust if we needed to, if we saw that kind of an increase. We're not going to leave, our voters with long lines again, if it's an hour in the morning and the line's long but not insanely long, then we're not going to make an adjustment. But if we see that there's a voter shift, I have sitting right here, Tyler, I have it every election broken down by turnout, voter turnout, and how those voters chose to vote. So if we see those numbers shift back toward voting on election day or in a precinct, we will make an adjustment too. This is the adjustment for now. I don't know if you recall, but one of our election workers came and spoke at one of the board meetings about how he was bored all day. I think in one of the elections, I'm just looking, we had 92% of the ballots were cast by absentee ballot. It was a small election, and we've always had a higher number of ballots cast by absentee in a smaller election, but 92%, that left very little activity in the precincts. I think some of our precincts had more workers than they had voters. So we will continue to watch the habits, but as long as we're seeing what we're seeing now is about 70% of the voters are casting their ballot before Election Day, whether in the early voting center or by absentee, leaving about 30% voting on Election Day. So as long as we continue to see that, we will keep the numbers at what we have with the new ones. But yes, we will adjust in the future if we see those habits switch back.
Gone are the days where there's really only a couple ways that you can get your voice heard. You have so many more options to make sure that your voice is heard in each and every election, and our local clerk's offices making sure that they're doing their part to make those smooth experiences each and every time you go to the polls. Debbie, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. Thank you.